Welcome back to our final episode of Testing America's Freedom. Education systems were founded many years ago to improve the process of teaching and learning. They were structured to mirror factories, with students acting as the raw material and educators as the assembly line workers fabricating successful young adults. In some ways, this model was great. For starters, it provided access to education to far more children. The factory model has some flaws, though. Over the years, the education community has established a theoretical and pragmatic foundation based on evidence that students exist outside of the four walls of a school building. More importantly, their experiences outside of school influence and strengthen the learning we expect to occur during the school day. Not to mention the deep research that has occurred over the last 20 plus years, showing the significance, importance, and impact of early learning. The assembly line approach simply isn't built to acknowledge these changes. Developments in pedagogy and community-based school and decision-making are driving a deep shift toward new models of teaching and learning. So has the online environment brought on by COVID-19. But the structures of industrial-style education are so rigid and stuck that reimagining education will require a lot of work. We must look closely at our schools and the relationship between students and teachers during the learning process to really rethink our standard and sometimes biased assumptions about culture, identity, age and grade span standards, and even what learning looks like. Most importantly, these considerations cannot take place in a vacuum. Students need to be involved in these discussions about reimagining education. Their lived experiences, especially for our communities and students of color, should be the foundation of how we reimagine teaching and learning so that it's designed to weave together diverse communities, ground us in the assets and the strengths of our families, and co-construct a more just society. Our youth can help us pave the way to an equitable future. We just need to listen. This year, I had the honor of hearing a group of youth activists tell their stories and establish a visionary call to action for education leaders and policymakers across the country. I'm very lucky that they have agreed to join us. Before we jump into the conversation, I will let them introduce themselves. First, we have Dr. Mary Earick, Dean of the School of Education for New Mexico Highlands University, and Dr. Greg C. Hutchings Jr., Superintendent in Virginia. So I'll turn to both of you to introduce your story, your students, starting with Mary.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. In 2012, I began hosting Problems of Practice summer summits for school districts and community members who wanted to rethink how we do school. We came together to develop strategies to listen to our families, listen to our communities, and most importantly, listen to our students. We focus these strategies on the voices that historically go unheard in our communities. These summits led to relationships and partnerships between universities and schools ready to take a deep dive into what it means to support culturally sustaining schools and communities. In 2019, Connie Kim and Diane Lee, here today, submitted their problem of practice for that year's summit. They were paired with local and national mentors to unpack how to address their problem practice. Over the past 2 years, their numbers have consistently grown. A network of mentors have emerged through the summit model. In 2021, this youth group will lead a high school leadership summit strand with teams from South Carolina, California, New Mexico, and New Hampshire at New Mexico Highland University's inaugural Problems of Practice Summit. Their story is one of deep listening, deep learning, and action. So now I'd like them just to quickly introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Connie Kim. I'm a senior.
My name's Kate Earick. Sorry. Sorry. Hi, my name's Kate Earick, and I'm a senior.
I'm Maya Furbish. I'm also a senior.
I'm Diane Lee. I'm also a senior.
And I'm Mason Earick. I'm also a senior.
Thank you. I will turn it over now to Greg.
So thank you, Dr. Samuel. I appreciate that. First and foremost, I just want to say that, this next generation of leaders that we are right now talking to, I believe this is a very critical time for them to have a voice. If we truly want to see change in this country and across this world, we are going to have to get out of the way of young people. This is their time to shine. This is their time to teach us some new things and new ways of just doing business. And I am so honored to be able to introduce two phenomenal seniors who are exceptional. They are what I call VIP, vision, integrity, and passion. They demonstrate those qualities every single day. And the one thing that I constantly advocate and I constantly remind them of is that you have to be unapologetic about being you. Be yourself. That is the easiest thing to do. And these young ladies are going to be able to share their experiences and to speak their truth unapologetically. So at this time, I would like to introduce our two seniors who will share their information, Ms. Ashley Sanchez Villafara and Ms. Lorraine Johnson.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Ashley Sanchez Villafara and I'm a senior.
Hello everybody, my name is Lorraine Johnson and I am a senior as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I really want to just dig into the conversation. So the first question I have is about today's model of schooling. And we know that today's model doesn't necessarily fit the learning needs of a lot of students. What have been your experience in schools that create your why for doing advocacy work? And I'll turn it to the New Hampshire Youth Group first.
So first I want to make clear the context that we're coming from. So our school is a mostly white high school in a rural area, and our group specifically is college-bound honors track students mostly. So that's our perspective. But from what I've experienced in school, I would say that our curriculum is very Eurocentric, and we wanted to work to, part of our focus was to make sure that it's, we did decentralize whiteness in our curriculum. And I think particularly because we are a school that's not very diverse, we don't have a lot of students that can share their stories. So I think it's especially important that we make sure our curriculum is diverse so that we can hear other voices. And I think something that happens a lot in schools like ours where there aren't a lot of BIPOC is that the people who are people of color become like, there's like tokenism. Those people are used as tokens in classes, and it's, I think that's something that we want to work a lot on.
Thank you so much, Connie. So I'll turn to Ashley, Lorraine, and see if you'd like to also respond to that question.
Well, our school is actually a little bit different. We come from a school where we actually have a lot of diversity. I think we are one of the most diverse schools in Virginia. I think we have like a population of a little bit more than 20 white students, and then the rest is like just very, very ethnic, very different. So personally, my reason for doing advocacy, it's less of my experiences with education, but more of when I was in the athletics type of thing. When I was playing volleyball, most of our students were most of our players were white, and I could count the 3 Black girls and that were on my team, and it made me feel a little uncomfortable. And so then I just woke up and I realized my junior year, why am I spending time on these girls who treat me different and this coach who treats me different? They don't really respect me. So I just decided that I wasn't going to play for them anymore. And then I started to get into the Black Student Union, and then that just opened up more opportunities for me. So that's pretty much my why for doing advocacy work at my school.
Thank you, Lorraine. Ashley?
Just touching base on what Lorraine is saying, our high school is the only public high school in the city. And so the reason why I'm very passionate about the work I do, just to tell a quick story, during my junior year, I was having a very difficult time with my classes because I was taking some rigorous classes. And I reached out to a teacher to ask her what are different ways that we can just tackle this, and what are different tools and resources that I can use to truly get past the obstacle that I was having at the time. And I strongly and clearly remember her response, and her response was, "I don't care what you do, it's your decision." And knowing that I was one of the few students of color in the class, and knowing that I needed help at the moment, she kind of turned her back away from me and refused to give it to me. So, going through this experience and having those feelings of fragility and just vulnerability kind of pushes my reason for just focusing and advocating for racial equity and addressing many of the systemic issues that I see at a local level in Virginia, but also on the national level, and just making sure that educators understand students' backgrounds and experiences, and just are critically aware of where they're coming from before they make decisions. Because truly, your experiences in high school do impact you beyond high school and your perception of the world. So I'm really, really a strong champion of making sure that students' needs are being met.
Thank you. Something that each of you have shared really sticks with me. I can also remember, even though I am a 40-something-year-old adult female, high school and some of the experiences, from the lack of seeing myself in curriculum and what that meant. I grew up I did 2 years of high school in Olympia, Washington, and 2 years in Tallahassee, Florida. So 2 very different experiences, 2 very different high schools. But the one similarity was I wasn't reflected at all in any of the curriculum. And so I certainly think that that is a piece that needs to be addressed. And I'm seeing it now with the explosion of the race discussions happening, students in particular challenging the curriculum, challenging what they're being taught, so that more students can start to see themselves. And Lorraine and Ashley, so much of what you're saying also touches my heart about those high school experiences. A big part of why I got into the policy work was, as a principal, I saw how policy was impacting my school. But my freshman year in high school, I was running for class president the next year. My sister was a senior, and it was the day to go and do presentations at the school-wide assembly. So I'm with my sister, her best friend, and I, and we're walking to my locker, and we saw one of my campaign flyers taped, reversed, on my locker. So we grabbed it and pulled it. And I remember to this day the feeling as I read what was written on the back of that flyer. And what it said was, just like Congress, niggers will never be in office. And what that did to my soul as a 15-year-old, I still, in some cases, feel like that 15-year-old. But what I had to do with that experience, and we went to the office, we gave the letter to the principal. I told them all I wanted to do was call my mom. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to talk to my mom, who was a single parent. And when I called my mom, she said, "Well, Aaliyah, you have 2 options. You can face it or you can run. What are you going to do?" And she said, "If you want me to pick you up, I will, but I will only pick you up if you face it." If you decide not to face it, you have to stay all day. So I went to the assembly, I read the letter, I actually showed it to them of what happened, and I left school that day. But I feel like a part of my youth and the innocence of my youth was taken at that moment. But also, it became a part of my advocacy work even now, because the only way to change is to use your life experiences, be transparent and authentic with them, and help others understand the journey. One of the things I find is that some people make assumptions as to why people do things, but it's not until they really understand the why. So thank you for sharing that, and just know that those experiences, all the while they do change you, they become part of your voice and your credibility to what you bring. So thank you for sharing that. So, we were talking about the school experience and how that changes you. Can you describe a time when you felt seen at school? And how often does this experience really occur? And I'll stop with that, and then I'll ask you a follow-up. And we'll start with Connie in the New Hampshire group. Kate, I'm not sure who was going to jump in there.
So between Connie and me, we're consistently the only two people of color in our classes. So we were thinking about what to say to answer this question truthfully. And unfortunately, we didn't come up with anything. A time in class where we felt heard or we felt represented. And I think that I personally wanted to come up with something because I didn't want to think that my entire childhood has led to nothing, But nothing came up. And I think that's very telling, even right now, that it didn't really occur to me.
Yeah. So can I ask you then, what are some ways that you think we can help set up teaching and learning and the school environment so that students do feel that they are represented, recognized, or empowered? What are some things that we as adults and leaders can do?
100% create that environment. It's up to teachers to take that initiative to see the students in their class and make sure that their class welcomes each and every single one of them. And it's not about doing one thing to change, it's about taking all the steps to make sure that every single day when a kid walks into their class, that they feel like they are represented, they can talk about their feelings openly. And it's not something that happens in one day, You have to do it every single day throughout the entire year and beyond that.
And I feel like sometimes schools try to make people like us, people of color at school, feel more seen, but a lot of it turns out to be more performative or tokenism. So a lot of teachers ask me or Diane about our experiences in our own homes, and it doesn't feel as much as representation as it does just another extra thing to do, another time to teach others about our lives.
Thank you. Ashley, Lorraine, I don't know if you'd like to chime in.
I think one experience that I've had where I've truly felt like I was seen, just another quick story, but I was in one of my classes, one of my research classes. I remember that day really well because we were having a conversation about racism and police brutality, and it was very uncomfortable, to be frank, because I was placed in a circle where it was just me, the only person of color, and then 9 or 10 other white students. And that was one of the times where I've never felt like I had to represent an entire community more. And I remember having that conversation. There was this one student that completely contradicted everything I said. And he said, we live in a post-racial society, and I honestly don't care about you. just saying racial slurs and backlashes and just making me feel bad about myself. And I remember after being in that circle, once we finished that conversation, the teacher clearly saw like the tears in my eyes. And I remember she was like, if you have to go, you can go. And I remember I just ran to the bathroom and just started crying in there. I didn't come back to class until like the end of the day. And I remember when I came back, she held my hands and she looked me in my eyes and she said, "Please do not drop the class. I see you, I hear you, and I'm going to be there with you every step of the way." And that's something that she kept. She kept her promise, and she was there with me every step of the way. She made sure I got through the class, and I felt like I was in a space that was supported, just inclusive, and just like my voice was heard. And I'm thankful to have met that teacher and to have her in my life, because that kind of truly shapes who I am and my experiences and just reaffirms the reason why I do the work. And thankfully, our school division has those people that truly try to be empathetic, culturally responsive, and critically aware. So I'm just really thankful for that.
Thank you, Ashley. Lorraine, I see you nodding your head. Good to see you. Do you want to join in the conversation?
Okay. So I had a teacher last year, my honors English teacher, Miss Staley. She was the one classroom that I was really excited to go to, because in every unit, in every lesson, she would try and implement something with African American history or African American literature. Every time that we would talk about, in junior, when you're in English in junior, it's usually about American literature and like the history of stuff. It's really connected with that government class that you take, but she always implemented something that had to do with African Americans. One of my books that we read was called Kindred, which was about this Black woman who lived in the 1970s, but she was time traveled back into slavery times, and she was considered like a well-educated slave kind of, but she kept going back and forth into different times with this same person with her family history. So, and it just became one of my favorite books, and I just love how she was able to implement different things of African Americans, because it really shows that even though me and one other girl was the only Black students in your classroom, you're trying to make a statement, you're trying to see us. And also it's really nice learning when you see next to you there's a white student who's asking you questions and different things, and it's like, oh, you really want to learn and stuff. So it's really nice to hear my students being engaged with my culture and stuff. So and I didn't ever have another class that was like that. So in her class, it really made me feel heard. And I think that a way that other teachers can do that is the exact same thing. When you're doing different units and stuff, especially in history, we can't just always talk about the founding fathers and the thing, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of it. And we always see, and when you get to that Black history unit, you talk about Martin Luther King and just the people that everybody already knows about. And so I think that there's more to Black history than Martin Luther King, than Frederick Douglass, than the big names. And I think that they also really need to learn that. So that would be my ask to do, is just to be able in your classrooms to implement something, some lesson or some unit, that every single unit to have to do with African Americans or other cultures, just something that's not solely for history and stuff.
Oh, Lorraine, that is so spot on. I have, my boys are 6 and 9, so 1st and 4th grade. And in their little few years of school already, they have come home every Black History Month. So this is going to be the 2nd for my littlest one and 4th for my other. And they learn about Dr. Martin Luther King. They learn about Rosa Parks, and then Same thing with Hispanic Heritage Month. They're learning about Cesar Chavez. And I'm like, wait, guys, you know what? Here's where we're going to stop and do the home curriculum. You tell your teacher that mommy said we're going to learn something else. And I don't even reinforce it, because how is it possible that we're still talking about the same people every year, for one, but that I grew up with? Like, there's certainly a sense of diversity and perspective. And one of the things my sister is actually adamant is that our boys and our children, her two and my two, know that Blacks were not just slaves, and we didn't just fight in the Civil War. We were kings, we were queens, but there is an honor to be had. And so I certainly think, going back to, I think it was Connie who brought up the importance of thinking about curriculum, that it is time to fundamentally challenge the curriculum and how and what we teach in schools. So, and that goes to show, from one state to another, one generation to another, the conversation is still the same. Oh, all right. I have another question for you all around really the role of student advocacy. So we know to really, really create change, it starts from the grassroots and moves up to really impact communities. How do you suggest that we start to really get critical and diverse perspectives from families, from students, to be able to create change? I don't know who wants to take that first.
Okay. Is it okay if we take it?
Yes.
All right, cool. So I think the main idea of this question is that in order to start doing this sort of work, you really need to build your connections within the community. If you just right out of the gates shoot straight for the stars, you kind of lack the individual experiences and perspectives, and you run the risk of really centering your own ideas. I know for people who are like more new to this work, like myself and a couple of our friends, we have to keep in mind that these aren't like new concepts. People have been doing like educational reform and anti-racism work. They've been doing it for ages and ages. So if you start out and you're not sure where to start, you really just have to listen to the community members who are affected by this. And when you actually hear those stories, then you use your resources to support them in whatever way they need it. One of the main recommendations I have for like people in the community, or say the school, is that when you actually hear these stories, make sure you follow through. At our school, they tried, like, was it a year ago? Yeah. They made us watch this film called High Tech High, and it was about like integrating a more progressive school system. Like they had windows everywhere and class schedules, or however you wanted it. It was more creative, I guess. And then after that, they had an information session for like an hour asking us, how can we make our school better? And so people went and gave their ideas, and then next year, nothing changed. So I guess if you're asking people to share their experiences and do work for you, then make sure you're doing, then make sure you're doing the work in return. Otherwise, you're just asking them to waste their energy on something that won't benefit them.
Thank you.
I actually think in my school system, I think in order to get critical perspectives, I think we need to do better with like advertising and like telling our families, like getting the word out there about PTA meetings and about community-led organizations, because sometimes, I don't know, in our school system, I feel like they have like a slick way of getting the word out there, where they only get the word out there to the same people. And I think that we really need to venture out. And even if it takes work, like I'll do it. I can go door to door in like different communities and hand out flyers if you have a PTA meeting. It's simple things. And I think that sometimes they'll put it on the school's website and stuff, but you have to asked to find it, or you have to go through different things, and nobody's going to put that much effort into just like finding the time for a PTA meeting or a student an organization that has to do with the decision that we're making for our school system. So that's definitely how I think we can definitely get perspectives, because we're very populated where in my school system, there's a lot of we have so much diversity. There's a lot of different communities that we're not reaching out to. So I think that we just have to be able to give the information to them, and I think they'll come. I don't think that we have a community where they're just going to have a paper about a PTA meeting where they're discussing important things and they just throw it away or they don't think about it. I see the different parents and stuff who want this type of information, and I try and give it to them and everything, but there's so much that I can do, like, as a student. So I think that I would definitely say that we need to work better on getting the word out there for PTA meetings and for community-led meetings, because we just need everybody's voice.
Lorraine, that's good. That's good. Ashley, I saw you going. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lorraine. Our city is really, really diverse, but it just doesn't, that's not reflected in the people that participate in things regarding school. And honestly, not a lot of non-English speaking families receive that information. It's more difficult to get in communication and in touch with them. So it's just focusing, I'd say it's just focusing on the most vulnerable communities, and those communities that you see that don't have the resources or don't have the time to find the information. I'm really big on just this little motto that I use. I say community plus platform plus community. You know, once you create a platform where people feel like they can speak about their experiences, where they feel included and where they feel comfortable, that's where you create a community that's just unified and everyone just works collaboratively together. So yeah, I just feel like it's just looking out for those most vulnerable communities and making sure that they're receiving the information, and just creating a platform where everyone can speak out and feel like their voices are being heard.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So each of you are doing advocacy work in one degree or another. And so I'm curious, what are some ways that you have used data to really include the lived experiences that you've had or people in your community have in your advocacy work? And I'll turn it over to the New Hampshire Youth Group first.
Okay, so we haven't really explored the idea of using data to help in our advocacy work yet, but we're hoping to start doing that more. We haven't gotten to this point yet before, and I think we're going to start trying to implement some more data-oriented change when we're doing summit work. We're going to be learning from people who know a lot more than us about what's the right way to go about that, and what kinds of things can we do with the data. Yeah.
That sounds good. Well, Mary, I'm going to invite myself to your next summit, because one of the things I'm a firm believer in is data-driven policymaking. When I was at the National Governors Association, we developed a strategic plan to help governor's office think through various education issues. And at the foundation of our work was data and equity. So I'm all in. So Ashley, Lorraine, did you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, our school system is kind of the same way. We don't really use too much data when it comes to things. We just love having our students share their stories. So we have a lot of social media platforms and a lot of different things where we just will tell them to DM us or like post something that shares their story of something that would go on in our school system. So I think I can tell you, I love my class. I think our class, for the class of 2021, we have done so much to get people's stories out there, get the word out there for different things. I love how, even like how in our, what am I trying to say? Our class is really diverse, but we reach every single group that is in the school. If we text one person who's in like your friend group, they all will get it. And then it's like a, what did they call it before? Oh, there was a pay it forward type of thing. So everybody will get the word, whether they like pay attention or participate or not, they will get the word. So I just love how active my class is on social media and how honest and bold they are to be able to speak out against like different things and everything. Like, it's really amazing. I'm so impressed with my class this year. I can go on and on about them, but I think that we're not as data driven. Usually me and Ashley, when we talk to the school board, we try to put data in there, but most of it is just about the stories that we tell to them. Like, that's proof enough for us. We're not going to like not believe you if you're sharing your truth. And I think that all of us, we pretty much know that. And so, yeah.
Okay. I want to pause for a minute and let Greg and Mary chime in. We've been hearing from the students, but as their leaders, is there anything that you would like to underscore or share before we get into some more questions?
Is it okay, Greg? I'll jump in. Sound good? All right, great. So there's a couple of points I'd like to really stress. And one is that in a rural community, looking at issues around race, racism, and diversity can be really challenging. And I am so impressed with this friend group that has developed, who is dedicated to really working with each other and holding each other accountable. I want to stress that this group has courageous conversations that I have been privy to around what it means to really address this work holistically in the school. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to the group for that before I say anything else. And then the other piece of this is that this issue around data, when you brought that question to them, and you all have been so cool and calm there at the table, the kitchen table. That's my kitchen table, by the way, at my house. We couldn't leave them in the school because it was too loud, right? They had announcements. So we had to quickly transport them up to the house. So that's where they are right now. I want to let them know that too. But they really had a long conversation about data and about, wow, maybe we should be looking at data a little harder. Right, you guys? You want to get a little, you can chime in here with me. But it really made them think, and it really is informing what we're thinking about doing at our summer summit this summer. So when you said you're going to come, we're very excited because we want to invite all the states now, the high school teams, to bring their data. And what we want to do is unpack it around root causes of inequity. So we're thinking of making that part of the focus of the summit. And this is where I say, it's a deep learning curve for all of us, right? And so for this group who's moving this work forward in rural New Hampshire, they're putting themselves out there to learn those new skill sets. And so I think that's going to be really, really interesting.
Well, I'll say, Mary, I'm doing a keynote on Thursday, I think it is, Thursday or Friday, and it is about racial inequity and looking at the role of the system. And I know there's about 200 people that are joining this convening, and I know for a fact, because these are leaders, some aren't going to share the same heightened concern about racial inequity as I do. And so for me, it goes into a quote that I saw years ago that, if we want to have a conversation and make decisions, let's use data. If we're going off opinions, we'll just use mine. And so it really helping to move the conversation from people's opinions. And when you really start to look and unpack the data, it tells a story. And it is why, there's been a hesitancy to collect certain pieces of data because communities of color are concerned about how the data would be weaponized against them, as we have seen, and rightfully so. Others are scared about how that data will tell the story and then potentially change how resources are allocated, change funding streams. And so the reality of it is it's what we choose to do with it to make it more equitable. So I am a big, being the nerd that I am, I just like data. But really when we use it well, it helps to pull opinions away from the conversation and really look at things for what they are.
And could I just dovetail with you on that?
Yeah.
That after Brown versus Brown, when the Kearns report came out, they were very clear in there that the only way that we were going to right the system was to understand that we had to focus on white behavior, not white attitudes, not how I feel at the moment. And so this idea of data, I find critically important as well, because if we had been focusing more on behaviors and what's occurring in our schools, looking at it from a racial lens earlier on, we would have been able to move that agenda forward quicker.
And can I chime in on this one?
Yeah, I just wanted to, oh, sorry.
No, you can go. You can go. It's fine.
I was just going to chime in. I just wanted to say that, hearing you all speak, it lets me know that, our future is going to be very different. And I truly believe we're about to see a huge paradigm shift in America if we just continue to allow these young people to speak their truth, as we just said, and to understand that data comes in different forms. You need to have anecdotal data. You need to have qualitative data. You need to have quantitative data. Those data pieces are important in order to make sure that you're making informed decisions. And I think that the more we tie not only your stories, but you tie your story to, and this is what the data is saying. So you heard what this person is experiencing. Now let's look at what this data is saying. That is even more powerful because, unfortunately, you can make data look any way you want it to look. Unfortunately, I'm just speaking truthfully. You can make a story out of data. But when you take young people's voices and then you actually support what they have said with the actual data, it's hard to deny. And I just, I always tell our young people, I'm going to speak this to you all too. It is so important to lean into your discomfort. It is not comfortable having courage. It is not comfortable being bold. But when you lean into your discomfort, that is when you make a difference. That is when you change, the narrative for public education moving forward. But I know that every single one of you on this call right here, you all have that courage and you have the boldness. So I'm preaching to the choir right now, but I think it's important for you all to share, those nuggets with your friends.
Thank you so much, Greg. In our last discussion, we were talking about some of the system pieces and really thinking about the role of data, also thinking about the stories and the anecdotal data. What do you all, as students in the school system today, see as the most pressing barriers in the pathway to building really a just, equitable education system? With COVID, so much has been turned upside down. And people are really, I think, for the first time, starting to challenge the education system and so many systems, health system, criminal justice system, we're seeing it across. But what do you see as those barriers that we need to think about so that we really can create this just and equitable education system?
Okay, I'll go. One of the first things that came to mind was first the lack of space to talk about it, and also people's unwillingness to talk about these issues. Just a short story. My first language is Spanish, and so I've been fortunate enough to go to a school that has Spanish class all of elementary school and in high school. And Spanish being my first language, I was little, I didn't think that was weird at all until I came to elementary school, and then they started asking me these questions. And at first I thought, hey, that's pretty neat. They're asking me about me. That's cool. It was cool up until the point where those questions started making me feel guilty for not knowing enough Spanish, for not knowing all of Latin America or Spain-specific history. And in school, they teach Spain Spanish, and my mom's from Mexico, so I know Mexican Spanish. And so they try to like correct me on the words that I use at home. And so it made me fear going to Spanish. And I started talking Spanish even less during class. I wouldn't participate. I speak it less at home. And it wasn't up until recently that I was like, why is this thing that's so unique to me? Why am I scared about having it? And when we have this society called Spanish Honor Society, and there's just some ideas floating around. It's a new organization. And it's become prominent that there's an inability to talk about things like cultural appropriation or profiting off of other people's cultures. And it's frustrating for us because we realize what's going on. We have this awareness that has come through these amazing summits, and the people on the other end just aren't receiving what we're putting out. And so for this to progress, it needs to be like two-sided. There needs to have that space, and people need to be open to communicating.
You know, I do understand, but I so don't understand why this is still happening today in our school system. I think about, I am first generation American in my family. And I remember my first day of elementary school in Olympia, Washington, and the principal walked in, was talking to the teacher. I also spoke Spanish, and they had a piece of paper, and they looked at me, they looked at the paper, they looked at me, they looked at the paper, and the principal said, "She's Black." And from that moment, I went home and I asked my mom, what does that mean? Because my family's from Panama, where there is a strong Afro-Latino presence. So I didn't know it to be any different. Yes, I spoke Spanish, and yes, I was Black. I still am fundamentally a very proud Black woman who is Latina. But it took me becoming 20-something years old to accept both parts of my culture, because school made me choose, and then made me feel like there was, like, how could I be Black and speak Spanish? Like, how in the world? And it's like, why is this still happening 20 some odd years later to our students? Like, you should be able to bring your authentic self and whatever that means to school, and it be accepted and valued, and you shouldn't have to feel bad. And so, that's what I'm hoping this podcast does. It gets into the hands of educators. It gets into the hands of community members so that they can hear the experiences. And oftentimes I think we don't talk about it because we think it's just us or an experience we're having, and to really be able to change the system, because I think it was 2 years ago, the fundamental demographics of public school changed. It is now more brown than it is white. And we need to create a space where students of color and across races should feel safe, welcomed, valued from the minute they walk in the door, and even more so when they leave outside of that school building. Greg and Mary, before I turn it over, I would love to hear your perspective as educators, as leaders. What should we be doing and thinking about so our students aren't feeling this way at school?
I think you're doing it right now, having this conversation. I think that we need to really ask our students, what are they experiencing? I think a lot of times what we jump to conclusions with in regards to like the adults in education is we go by our experience. Now, unfortunately, some things are still the same in a lot of ways, but we also have to accept the fact that some things are different too. We have come a long way, and I always try to tell, especially our Black and brown young people, that we've come a long way and we still have room to grow. I want us to acknowledge both. We've come a long way. Right now, I could be the superintendent of Alexandria You know, like I can actually be in a leadership role. I can be the CEO of an organization. I'm not drinking from a black water fountain. I'm not denied access into a restaurant. I can live in any community that I want to live in. You know, we have a black billionaire, Oprah Winfrey, and Tyler Perry, right? You know, so I feel that we've come a long way. And if we don't acknowledge that, we have shamed everybody else who has paved the way for us to get to where we are. However, we still have room to grow. And the only way we're going to grow is by giving the platform and the opportunity for young people to speak up and to have the voice. And we need our young people to be able to speak up. And when they're having this voice, for us to not be critical and to try to shut them down and make them feel as if they can't tell the truth or speak their truth. You know, and then once they speak their truth, not only do we need to listen, but we have to now put that into action. You know, it's going to require us to rethink how we do any business in public education. It's going to require us to take everything that we've learned for all these years and like just our normal way of doing things and saying, okay, we can't do it like this anymore. Our kids do matter. So I think that once we can do that, we will see immediately a shift in how our young people feel. And, you know, I believe in calling a spade a spade. People who are damaging, you know, this generation, it is the adults. The adults in this country are damaging our next generation. And if we don't stop, you know, taking our core values that are wrong in a lot of ways and pushing them on our young people and indoctrinating them into what we want them to be, which is the same old stuff that's been happening for the past few years in this country, then we have failed, you know, this generation as a whole. So I won't get on the tangent. I'm going to stop there. But I am just fired up and excited about giving them a voice and not only listening, but doing action behind that voice.
Thank you, Mary.
So I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. As you know, I'm a dean of education, dean at a school of education, and I do that very intentionally. And so where I have expectations of advocacy with youth groups, they have expectations of advocacy from me. And so my work and my advocacy is located in producing teachers. So the teachers that will go into the classroom that can cause harm, Gregory, just as you said, or can be there to see the students, as these young women from Virginia said so eloquently. It is my responsibility as a dean of a school of education to develop systems and pipelines so that teachers begin to reflect the students that they're working with. And I have to hold myself and my university accountable to doing that work. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about the systems piece to this, that until higher ed steps up as well, I don't think we can see the change that we need to see in a timely fashion.
Can I add something before we move on?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I was thinking there's like with the obstacles, with these kind of obstacles, there's like multiple levels of it. And I was talking with the group last night about how there's national level stuff, and those are generally bigger, and people will address it more often. But then there's stuff within the New Hampshire school education, your state school education, or maybe your specific school or your friend group even. And I feel like things like, well, bullying and violence, those are, people will address those more. But then things like what Diane talked about, microaggressions and stuff, those are like, well, that's okay, right? That's not really racist, right? So I feel like there's like a level that people are okay with. And yeah.
Yeah, there's a lack of understanding that microaggressions have, over time, even a more profound impact on the mental health of BIPOC students. Like, it's mentally exhausting for students to be actively trying not to crumble in front of their other students because of something that they think was a joke or that they think wasn't a big deal.
And microaggressions are one of those things where you can get extremely defensive about easily, and that's like the first instinct. But unless you're being able to understand where you were wrong and being open to taking that change and taking it in stride and making sure that you don't continue with those microaggressions, that's really where we can start to see this change being made.
I love it. So Ashley, Lorraine, sorry, we went all around and we're coming back to both of you. Would you like to add in anything?
No, you're completely fine. When the New Hampshire youth group was talking, the first thing that popped to my head was an experience I had. At our school, we had this big, huge showing. It's like the school system paid a lot of money to have this showing for kids, which was like a documentary about kids who like struggle with anxiety or something like that. But I remember like in our like Black Student Union group and stuff, we've been asking before to put this video. I forgot what the documentary was called, but a documentary that had to do with like how Blacks and Hispanics and other marginalized groups feel in group settings when they are put under pressure or in advanced courses and stuff like that. And I just remember thinking like to myself, like, we've been pushing our documentary to watch. We were doing a lot of work, willing to pay, and they put a lot of time into this video about anxiety and stuff. And all of the people who, it just made me so frustrated because I personally put like a lot of work into doing documentaries and stuff like that, and they kept shutting it down. But they used this other video, and it's just, I don't even know how to put it. It just made me really frustrated because we put a lot of work into doing something that we wanted to do, something that we thought that our student body could relate to, and then they did this other video. And that's literally the first experience that popped into my head when you guys were talking about the different, I forgot what you guys were talking about, but that's just the first thing that popped to my head. So thank you for sharing your experiences, because that brought it all back to me at that day. Yeah.
Ashley, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so earlier you guys were talking about just basically like identity and non-English speakers, and see, I can connect with you, Ms. Samuel, on a personal level, because just like you, I also identify as Afro-Latina. My parents, they come from Colombia, so I grew up speaking Spanish at home and partly at school as well. In elementary school, I took a couple core classes in Spanish, and I remember when I got to high school, I think it was last year, I had an experience with a teacher specifically, and we were just talking about identity and racism and ethnicity and all those systemic issues. And then the teacher told me, he said, "Oh, well, you're not Colombian. You can't take part in that. You can't identify as Colombian. You can't say that your parents are from there. You can't, you shouldn't be proud of speaking Spanish, because if you speak Spanish, that means you take part in the culture of your oppressors. It means that you take part in that oppressive culture and in that colonial ideology and mindset." And that experience literally affected me mentally on so many levels. I started to rethink my identity, because I was like, yeah, I'm Latina, but I'm also Black as well. And it was just one of those moments where I felt, after that experience, I felt like I had to choose. Like I couldn't take part in both communities. But honestly, just because I'm a part of one doesn't make me less of another. I'm proud of both sides of my identity. I'm proud of being Black and I'm proud of being Latina. And just going back to your question of like, what's the most pressing barrier to create an equitable education system? I strongly believe it's just understanding of the term of intersectionality, and just understanding how people's overlapping identities and their lived experiences affect them, and understanding the different levels to oppression, and understanding that because, for example, you're Black and you're a female, you're a woman, you have barriers in place that prevent you from succeeding in your life, that prevent you from getting to a place where you feel comfortable. So with me, I just think about just being cognizant of people's intersecting identities and just emulating those critically aware and those conscious practices that ensure that they're receiving all the needs and circumstance, and you're understanding their circumstances. Because just like my experience, I wasn't being heard, and I wasn't being heard by others, especially an adult. And I really needed his help during that time. I was having a very difficult time. And then I just got turned down once again. So I just feel like it's just understanding people's identities and just understanding how that affects them throughout their daily lives.
See, that's horrible. That's horrible that you have to go through that, especially now. And we need to talk about who those teachers are, because I think the thing is, we need to make sure that we're addressing when adults are making our young people feel like that. Because if we don't address it, it will continue for generations to come, and it will never end. So I appreciate the fact that Ashley and Lorraine and all of our NH Youth Group have spoken their truth, because the only way we're going to know to make something different, or to at least address it, because there's some things that I can address that you can't address, you know, Ashley. So I'm going to use my platform to make sure that I am addressing that, so that won't happen to anybody else, you know, moving forward. And if people can't change their behaviors, we have to be bold enough in our organizations to say, you cannot work for us. You can no longer be in this organization if you are not willing to, one, listen and treat our kids with respect that every single one of them deserve, and to uplift them. You know, educators, we have so much power. We can either make or break this country. We don't realize how powerful we are. We have to start taking this education world extremely seriously, and not allowing any and everybody who has a breathing body to come into our classrooms to teach, period. We got to have expectations and set them high, and not be afraid to say, you don't fit this mold and you are not good enough to be a teacher here, period. You know, so it just tears me up to hear that, you know, to hear that you've had that experience. And we just got to talk after this.
Well, can I just take a minute? Mary, I don't know if you want to get in, but I'm going to talk to our ladies here who are bicultural. Right now, they might tell you all the things that you cannot be, but guess what? They will pay you for that more later. I oftentimes negotiate more money in my jobs because I speak 2 languages. So if you want me and my network and what I bring, my bilingualism, pay me, because now you need it. Before, they called me a nerd. Before, they said I didn't fit in. Now they call me boss. Now they call me doctor. So it will all be worth it. Just hang in there and take these experiences. But I also say, don't forget them, and tell those stories, because it will make the difference. I will share professionally in my last 4 roles, I have been the first and oftentimes the only woman of color in that leadership role. And when somebody second guesses me, or I deal with the microaggressions, I have to realize that it's not just about me, but it's for those coming behind me. And I also make it very clear that the platform that I have was never given to me. There was no privilege, there was no hookups, there were no backdoor deals. It was the reason why I have the platform that I have now is because I have earned it, I have worked for it. And so when I speak, I not only speak my truth, but I speak with a sense of credibility. So all these experiences that you're gaining along the way, as difficult as they are, and sometimes unfair, just know that it's another tool being put in your toolbox, another tool being put in your toolbox. And when it's time, you will be able to use that tool not only for yourself, but to help for somebody else. So I'm sorry that you're going through these experiences, but just know it will be worth it if you continue to use your voice and your platform as you are. So sorry, I went on a preacher mode for just a minute. Joe, I don't know if you want to use any of that, but boy, that one got me. Mary, did you want to jump in?
I just want to like dovetail with you on your comments. So I can tell you right now at my university that they are doing outreach, hoping for young people coming in who are bilingual, biliterate in our state. It is the highest need. The moment is coming. I really believe it. If the right leadership is in place at some of the universities, where we can start shifting how it looks, the landscape in our schools. And by the way, any of you all on this call who are looking to go into higher ed, you just need to please call me. They can take this out of here. Please call me, because I would love to network with you about where you'd like to be long term. Okay, I know a lot of deans.
All right. So the next question that I want to ask you is really about the shared responsibility, which we're kind of moving towards that theme, and really understanding the shared responsibility that we have to improve the work that we have going forward, and thinking about how to lead with authenticity, humility. How do we really build the capacity? So how do you pay this work forward? Like, how do you do this every day, knowing that in some cases you might be the only one in a circle saying, hey, that's not right? How are you doing this?
Well, a way that our group has been doing this, and I think, as you know, Dr. Samuel, is through the summer summits. And also our mini summit conferences. Those really give us the opportunity to not only be able to express how we feel about our current educational system, but it also gives us a lot of great resources to be able to learn how we can advance our agenda forward, but also a lot of great connections and people. I mean, if we hadn't been to the summit, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to be on this podcast with all of you and be able to talk about our experiences from where we come from. And so our work as a collective is leading up to this summer's summit, where we plan on developing our own strand and exploring these concepts of microaggressions and intersectionality within our schools, and also giving students the voice that they need to be able to speak up about these issues, and the knowledge they need as well, so that when they go into discuss these issues, they're not just, coming up with it out of midair, but they actually have some in-ground proof and personal experiences.
Thank you.
I wanted to add on that, like, with the part of the question about being being the only one to be standing up about this stuff. I've found that I forget your name. Sorry, you talked about social media earlier. And I was thinking that having a lot of access to social media, definitely, at least for me, and I think my friends, has helped me to be more aware of this stuff and to not feel alone in this fight and stuff like that.
And the one thing about the social media, though, that you need to be aware of too, is like the idea we talked about earlier of performative activism. I think social media oftentimes will be is a platform for people to really start doing that, and we saw it with the George Floyd protests in June. I mean, there was a controversy with this celebrity doing a photo shoot on top of a car with like BLM protest signs, and then leaving to her mansion right after the whole thing and just posting it out. It's this idea about making sure you're standing up and being able to be an activist, but you're not doing it to further your own agenda, but more so to help those who are suffering from the system that needs to be changed, if that makes sense.
Totally.
I agree 1,000%. I think that especially with the rise of social media, that's why I really don't take social media for advantage anymore, because I used to not have a big social media presence and I didn't want to do a lot. But then I realized when you said about the George Floyd situation, I think without social media, there wouldn't be people around to record the incident. There wouldn't be a hashtag. It wouldn't have been a global a global situation if we didn't have social media and stuff like that. And there's, even with back in the day with the Rodney King incident, where they actually have it recorded and everything, but now that we have social media, it's bigger, and instead of just recording it and it only getting into the courtrooms and stuff, it's getting to the whole world. The whole world has access to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's amazing, and that's why I think social media is the best way that we get our word and everything out there. So I appreciate that.
Of course, I think social media is one of those things where there's really two sides to it. There's definitely a lot of positives, like you're talking about, the ability to spread it and have that impact, like on a global level. And then also, there's also like the certain negative aspects of it too, with performative activism, as well as, you know, being able to be able to spread misinformation as well. You know, so it's one of those things where there's a certain level of awareness you have to have when traversing the social media landscape. And it's important to be able to recognize, you know, all the positives and be able to notice when people are taking advantage of those negative aspects of social media.
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm challenging those in my circle who have a lot to post and say about things that are happening politically. And I love to charge them to say, have you actually read the policy position? Do you really know what it is that's being proposed? Because I believe in really being educated on a topic and not just believing an individual. I have been very fortunate to work with amazing policymakers on both sides of the aisle. And there are really great Republican governors, senators, congressmen and women, and really great Democratic ones. But it's taking the time to know the candidate, taking the time to know what they believe in, and being able to check what you're doing. And so for all the people who are using social media, that's great, but check your resources and then go out and vote. Don't let your post or, you know, whatever you decide to forward on be the end of it. Really follow through. And I say that because I do believe one of the fundamental issues in our society that is not partisan is education. We need everybody, all hands on deck, to bring the best ideas to the table so that we can create this equitable education and future. So we are almost at time, and I would be remiss without asking each of you, so our leaders on the call and our student leaders on the call as well, as to what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a teacher, a policymaker who is saying that they want to reimagine education. And I'll go first. For me, I don't want us to get back to an improved normal. I don't want normal. Normal is what got us here. So as we think about post-COVID, whatever that's going to be, I don't want to take normal with us. I want us to think about how do we really prepare the next generation for their future, the workforce. And so to me, getting back to normal is just not an option. So my charge would be stop advocating for us to get back to normal. Let's define normal again. So I'll just kind of go across the screen. Why don't we start, Ashley, with you, and then we'll go to Lorraine, and then we'll go to the New Hampshire group, okay? Ashley?
For me, it's an ask that I would say is be intentional. Just be intentional and understand that we are all different, and understand that there are systemic issues that affect people of color, that affect marginalized communities, and just work with having them in mind and understanding that you have a role in the work of anti-racism, because everyone can do something. So for me, it's just be intentional.
Thank you, Ashley. Lorraine?
I ask, one piece of advice that I would definitely give is to involve your youth in the education process. because ultimately the decisions that you're making and the school that you're redefining and reimagining is going to 100% affect the students. I don't think that you can go into a process and say that they're going to change. I don't think that you can reimagine a school or make a policy without concerning the students, because at the end of the day, they are what the policy is being made for. They are what the school is being redefined because of. And a lot of times we think like that. A lot of times, even with our elementary school kids and middle school kids, even the younger kids, they know what's up. They know what's going on in their school system. They see what happens in their classroom and everything. And I just think that they're not as involved because we don't want to hear from them. But I was an elementary school student one day. I had a lot to say then, just as much as I had a lot to say now, but I always got crossed from that like fine line between you have adult and child. My mom, she reminds me of that line all the time. Child, you are a child in this situation. And I had to take that with me even at school. I would have to like watch what I say, because I was like, I don't want to find that line between adult and child, but they have to hear this. So throughout my whole school experience, that is what I've been learning and trying to realize. Don't cross that line, but make sure that you're heard and that what you're saying like makes sense and everything. So I definitely think that you need to involve your students. And if you're like a student like me and you know that they don't want to talk because they don't want to like be disrespectful, invite them. Say, oh, let's hear from you. Oh, invite these groups because we're put in a very difficult situation. And I just think that, just like we said before, educators should invite the students to have those discussions and have those different things, because ultimately we're the ones affected. And yeah.
Makes me think about a quote that I don't know who said it to attribute it to, but they said, don't plan for us without us. And it sounds like there's involvement. And I will say, trust me, my 6-year-old has one heck of an opinion about what back to school should be. And he's already told me at 6, Mom, I don't know if I want to go back. You know why? Because I can actually, when I'm done with school, I can go outside and play. And he even said to me, Mom, you know what? During group reading, whatever they call it, group reading, I can just sit on my beanbag and still listen. He's already at 6 years old, starting to compare his kindergarten experience and first grade and pull the best of both of the worlds. And so I do agree. So I think we need to be intentional and we need to involve our students at all levels.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Even now, like you have a lot of the students who have their parents to like speak up for them when they go to like the different meetings and stuff. They say, well, my child can't do this and my child does that, but can we hear from your child? Like that's what we really want. We want to go directly to the source. So I agree 1,000%.
Noted. All right, we'll turn to the New Hampshire group, and Connie, we'll start with you and just go down Mary's kitchen table.
Well, I think that it's really important to make an environment where people feel comfortable to speak up about stuff, and when students do speak up, the teachers should actually listen, and not just hear it, but like actually listen. And I think part of making the good environment would be like starting to integrate different voices into the classroom, like bringing different books. If you're in English class, we read one book by Chinua Achebe. We could include different books by different voices. And shoot, sorry, I had something.
We can come back if you remember it.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, one thing we talked about and mentioned quite a bit when we discussed these questions is the idea of being open. I think that, people oftentimes in administration and teachers, they get comfortable in what they what they know. They get comfortable in what's normal for them. And as you said, we're redefining that normal. So being able to take the opportunity to be able to learn from experience and grow from it, that's really important as well for going towards faculty, administrators, students, everybody. Being able to take the opportunities that you are given to be able to further your agenda or further educate yourself. One of the reasons why we had 3 students go to the original summit was because our school district didn't want to send a team of faculty or administrators to be able to learn about these issues. But luckily enough, we had 3 students, 2 of which are here, that were able to go to there and be able to discuss some of the issues that they've been, having in the system. But also, those are the things that the faculty need to hear. Those are the things that the administration need to hear. So no matter what, you have to be willing to take those opportunities so that you can make sure that you can further educate yourself and reignite that classroom environment.
No, that's perfect because I just remembered what I was going to say.
Go ahead, Connie.
Yeah, so it was relating to the sending teachers to the summits because if a teacher doesn't know where to start, because I know some teachers maybe want to start integrating different voices and making an inclusive environment, but don't quite know where to start, send your teachers to this stuff. Send your faculty and everything to conferences like these. We had one staff member, faculty member, come to these, and he's been really great about making sure that he's educating us properly about diverse cultures and stuff like that. So I think that would be a really good first step to find conferences like this.
100%.
All right. So what I'm hearing is be intentional, involve your student population, create a safe environment, and listen to the students, bring in different voices, and as educators, be willing to be a teacher and a student. Okay. All right.
So my kind of point that I wanted to make would be aimed more towards policymakers and people in higher positions. We really have to look at how we're using our funding, right? So I'm a huge history nerd, and I mean, like reading our textbook in AP Euro, and I'll like read something that doesn't match up with this new information that I've learned over the past year. It's like something's not adding up here. But if we expect, well, teachers can obviously build that environment, that safe environment where everyone feels included. But when we get to the actual teaching part, we're expecting them to erase years and years worth of Eurocentric education with these outdated textbooks and no new materials, right? So we really have to just look at how we're funding and what we're putting our money into for the students.
Okay, so I am a firm believer that being an ally, being an advocate, those aren't things that you call yourself, it's things that you actively demonstrate with your actions. And I'd say to anybody that there's no such thing as too late. You can start right now, and you can include anybody. Somebody else mentioned, Lorraine, I think, was that why aren't we including elementary school students? They're being just as affected. They have voices of their own. We all know that if you have younger siblings. It's kind of baffling, honestly, why we aren't taking advantage and valuing their voices at such a young age when there's no societal pressure on them yet.
I guess I'll go. What I was going to talk about has kind of been touched on throughout this entire podcast, and it's about how we view activism. So we're all in this grassroots bottom up, right? And that's how we're getting change. But it's also just as important for the people at the top. We were talking in our group about multiple levels. There's students, there's educators, there's state level, and then there's national level. And then even above that, there's global, but that's, and And so we're talking from students appealing up, but it's just as important for the people on the top to be appealing down. Educators are supposed to serve for the students, right? And you're not going to be able to get changes in, like, say, AP curriculum. Take AP US history. It's a race to the very end, and you have to include every single little thing. Because in order for you to get college credit, you have to know every single little thing that they're going to ask on the test. And guess what? That test is regulated by a central organization, the College Board. And in order for any change to happen, you need national policy in order to reevaluate what we consider is central to our education. We can talk about all we want to happen, but none of that can happen without national, state, and teacher change. Nobody's going to get the College Board to change what they teach.
Yeah, and I think, to go off of that, we look at different areas of the country, and there's these major discrepancies in what's taught. There's nothing really nationwide that's kind of considered every state essentially kind of develops their own curriculum and kind of what they teach more. And so one of the issues is that you can come from one state and have a different level of education than coming from another state. So I guess one of the things that, going off of what Mason said, we need to make this, national policy and kind of rethink of what we think of education. Because there's other countries in the world that have taken the steps to reinvent their educational system. We're just kind of stuck in the past still.
Yeah. All right, so to our adult leaders, we just got a lot of charges, thinking about how we view activism and the student voice. To the policymakers, money absolutely matters, and thinking about the policies that are funded both at the federal and state level. A lot of people don't understand that 80% of the education budget in a state comes from the state level. So it is those decision makers at the state level that are determining the funding amount and how money flows. And it matters. It absolutely matters. So creating a value and a safe space for our student voices. I mean, we have at least a dozen charges that from these students today. But Mary and Greg, from your lens, what's one piece of advice that you would want to give other educators or policymakers as we move forward?
I'll go ahead. So I'm going to offer an equity invitation, and I can promise you that it's grounded in research. It will work. So move away from grades, first, second, third grade. Move away from grading, A's, B's, C's. The identity of an educator will shift from being an overseer towards an emancipator. That's what we need to see happen.
And it's hard to go after all the students and all of their charges, right? So I say ditto to everything that they've said. And I just want to elaborate on what Dr. Samuel mentioned earlier, that, we didn't have it right prior to the global pandemic. So why go back to not having it right? And we have seen from the federal level, from the state level, that public education can be a priority. We need it. Now, we still haven't gotten all the funding we need, but when we needed more funding than we got more funding, right? So this now, in regards to the federal government coming up with billions of additional dollars in the midst of a crisis, that is now our minimum amount that we're starting with for public education moving forward in regards to funding. If they could come up with these dollars in a couple of months, let's see what we can do when we get our economy back in order and when we are able to say public education has to be at the front or at the top of the list in regards to, our democracy and our global our global economy moving forward. So I say, let us not go back to how things were, and let us continue to advocate for the appropriate funding and support from our federal government and our state to fund public education.
Thank you. As we talked internally about the audience for this podcast, We didn't want to pigeonhole it to one particular audience. We wanted to structure it in a way that if you are a parent, you could take something away. If you're an educator, a student, a policymaker. And I will say, since this is the last episode and I do have moderator mic privileges, I'm going to take it to say first that my hope through this podcast is that people really start to fundamentally understand how inequitable education is across states, across districts, but there is a fundamental charge because the experiences are the same for so many students. And so how can we start to change the experiences? Because education is the motherboard for every profession. So if we don't start plugging in and making sure our motherboard of education is right, we are going to continue to not only hurt the next generation, but we will not be the global economy and workforce and country that we could be. We have to take a hold of what's happening in education. So with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Gregory C. Hutchings Jr. I'd like to thank Dr. Mary Earick. I'd like to thank Lorraine and Ashley and our amazing students from the New Hampshire Youth Group for bringing your voices, bringing your stories. And I really hope, I'll give you a charge to continue to move forward, because not only do your peers and your friends need it, but us as adults do too. So thank you.